Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to this edition of CIONET Spotlight. CIONET is the largest global community of innovators, CTOs, CDOs, CIOs, with a community of about 10,000. So we welcome you in joining us today. Over the past year, we've featured a lot of digital leaders from all over the world. And in this edition, we are featuring a dynamic and high-profile academic, Venkat Venkatraman. So, Professor, welcome.
I'm just checking to see if my sound is working.
I hear you beautifully. We are good. So let me give a little background on Venkat while he is checking his sound. So Venkat is a professor in management from Boston University, from the David McGrath Jr. School of Business. He has also authored a book called The Digital Matrix, New Rules for Business Transformation Through Technology. That he authored that book and it was published in 2017. And a little bit more on his impressive background. He previously taught at MIT Sloan School of Management and at the London Business School for a stint. He has an undergraduate in mechanical engineering from Indian University of Technology and an MBA from Indian Institute of Management and a PhD in strategic management from the University of Pittsburgh. His doctoral thesis was awarded the best dissertation from the Academy of Management, and he is one of the most cited researchers in management. So thank you. We are honored to be here with you today. Can you hear me okay now?
I can hear you, and I hope you can hear me. Perfect.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. So I'm glad we got that worked out. So I would love to hear just a little bit about your book, but before we do that, I'd like to take a step back and talk about higher education, how the pandemic has influenced or changed things over this past year. It's an interesting area with everybody going virtual just so drastically. So tell us a little bit about what happened at Boston University and what do you see moving forward?
Yeah, it's a great living experiment over the last 15 to 18 months. In March of 2020, we suddenly decided we're going to go virtual. Many people had not heard of Zoom, even though we had used it. The students had not used it as much. And we shifted relatively easily for those students that were in the US and on campus. Then people could go home and they could actually access our content like what we are doing right now. The challenge was in dealing with students that went overseas, went back to India, went back to China, or went back to other parts of the world. One, because of the connectivity, and second, because of the time zones, because people had to get up very early in the morning because we were maintaining our academic calendar and scheduled exactly the way it would have been on campus. I think the challenge was less for them because they had actually formed their relationship on campus and then they went home. And then in the fall of last year, we admitted the first cohort of students that were all virtual, right? So for them, it was much more of a challenge. But I think over the last 12 months, people have gotten used to it. They figured out how to make the best use of Zoom. And we as faculty members have also learned how to make the best use of Zoom in terms of finding Google Docs, finding other ways of communicating with them, recording some content and giving it to them beforehand, and making use of the actual sessions to be much more interactive rather than sage on the stage model of education, which might have been popular before. I think going forward, this is going to have an interesting challenge. We are still very much looking forward to a residential campus experience in the fall, but with flexibility of using technology where it makes sense.
Wow, it has been a crazy year. I know even I reside in Atlanta, Georgia, and for us, there's a new school here that just opened, a high school that's completely virtual. So I guess a lot of people spoke up and said, this flexibility has been really great for our family. So we're going to go ahead and just have a full-time virtual school. And I know you're very involved in edX, which is virtual teaching as well. So did you get started with edX prior to the pandemic or as a result of?
No, I think we got started with edX, I would say 4 years back, just around the time that my book came out, the book that you mentioned, The Digital Matrix. edX asked us at Boston University to design a program, digital leadership and digital product management. So 6 or 7 faculty members got together who had done various facets of research around digital transformation. And we designed our first MicroMasters, not quite a degree program, but a certificate program.
Right.
And we offered it in two tiers. The first tier is free to anyone, anywhere in the world, to access the content. And then a certificate offering, I think people paid like $200, a little bit around that price point, for them to get a certificate of completion, which means they took the content seriously, they did all the work, they did the analytical exercise, they did all the projects that needed to be completed. And my course, I would say, I had more than 30, 40,000 students in the first rounds, and a few number obviously wanting to get certificate at the end. So it is gratifying to faculty members like us to be able to touch so many people in this format. Then coming out of that, we have now designed the first degree program, the Questrom online MBA program. And it's been fascinating. I've taught twice so far, and we've had 800 students from 23 different time zones that come live every week. They do asynchronous discussion. They have live discussion with the faculty once a week. We had 400 students in the fall and 400 students in the spring. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to be teaching the third cohort, and that will be 500 students in each cohort. They love it because it gives them the flexibility to be able to still work and take a very good program. And even if they're traveling for work, they can still maintain their schedule of learning.
Wow. Well, lucky for them. That is fantastic. What a great experience for them. And so glad you've started this at Boston University. It's really, really great. So let's talk about some different sectors. And with regard to, well, actually, before we get into the other sectors, I want to hear a little bit more about your book. The book that Digital Matrix from 2017 and the one that you are working on now. And then I want to talk about the implications on different sectors.
Sure. My interest has always been at the intersection between strategy and technology. So obviously from a leadership perspective, rather than from a technical perspective. And what I found in the discussion of digital transformation is that the strategic competitive context was largely left out of the discussion. It was seen as either technology push or business pull, as if we are continuing to operate with the same business models, the same organizing logic, the same set of ecosystem partners, and really trying to be a little bit more efficient with technology. What I wanted to bring to the discussion was that the digital transformation is really a business transformation where the industrial logic ideas are now being challenged by a new logic where technology is at the center of this new logic. So what I did in the digital matrix was simply argue that every company faces a digital future in which their competitors are going to be the traditional players that competed with them, who will use technology a little bit better, faster, and different from the past. But more important is the recognition that they're going to face two other formidable competitors, the digital giants, the Amazons, the Alibabas, the Apples, and the Microsofts of the world, and then a whole range of startups who all believe that the power of the technology is to solve the problem differently. They single-mindedly focus on what technology can do, but they also believe that the incumbents cannot actually do it as fast and as efficiently because they're trapped in their old way of thinking. So what I wanted to do is to bring attention to the fact that when you look at digital transformation, put it in a competitive context and look beyond your industry. So look at the experimentation at the edge of your industry, because customers are now being provided services across different sectors, and we expect the same level of functionality to happen. And then how will you begin to reinvent yourself for a world that is going to be much more digital at the core, whether it's products, processes, services, organizations, or business models. And that's really the logic of that book. Then what came out after applying these ideas is that much of what we know today came from what I call as asset-light, information-intensive industries: books, movies, media, advertising, travel, relatively asset-light, even though travel could be asset-heavy, but the part that started to change were the asset-light parts of the economy. So now what I'm working on is a set of research project, hopefully in a book that I'll finish next year, is the digital transformation challenges for asset-heavy sectors: automotive, transportation, mining, housing, construction, where the industry 4.0, the industrial internet, right, the smart internet, where the products are getting smart, we can do more things with programmable hardware to redesign what a tractor will be, to redesign what a car will be, as Tesla has shown, and our emphasis on EV and autonomy. It is not going to happen as fast as the asset-light industries, but it's going to happen sooner than most people think. So my attention is now on helping the CIOs, the CDOs, and the chief technology officers who in the asset-light saw themselves as at the periphery of transformation, will now see themselves at the center of this transformation and acceleration that's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years.
So in terms of the sectors that have done it right, so let's talk about the asset light. We talked about that a little bit. In terms of the asset heavy, which ones are doing it right? And furthermore, which sectors are failing miserably?
Yeah, I think it's early to declare somebody as a failure, but it's also early to declare somebody as a success because we are in the early stages of the transformation. But if I make the distinction between industries that are slightly ahead from industries that can learn from these leaders, the automotive industry today is an excellent example of asset-heavy sector that's going through transformation, right? 12 years back, there was not a single Tesla car on the road. Now we got over 1 million Tesla cars on the road. There was one electric charger. Now we got 250,000 electric chargers, right? So we're creating that infrastructure where we can now be much more efficient and effective in terms of moving people, moving goods, right? So we now have not just Uber Eats, but Rivian and FedEx and Ford 150 trucks, all of that, the Lightning trucks, all of that is now a reality. It's no longer in the concept stage. So when you look at,
oh, sorry, I was just going to say
that sector, yeah, please go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, I was just going to say it actually is really fascinating and super impressive if we look at the automotive industry, because if you think about their product roadmaps, those are 4 or 5 years out. And so they've been thinking about this and practicing this digital transformation way before other industries, I feel. You're spot on.
Exactly, right? Now, but even then, you realize that they have announced now the roadmap for 2030, right? Many of them want to do electric and autonomy. But that idea has been around for a while. When the DARPA challenge started, that said, let's do autonomous drive, right? So you got the Google team that really was trying to do these experiments at the edge. So back to the book in which I talk about why you should look at experiments at the edge, is because when you look at experiments at the edge, in the beginning, people say, this is crazy. This is not going to happen, right? And then suddenly they start to collide against your business model. Just like today, we may look at drone or electric vehicle takeoff and landing as something that is going to be far-fetched, or hypersonic transport could be far-fetched. But at some point in time, these multiple converging technologies converge and make something possible at a price point that is technologically, physically, and commercially feasible. And then everyone will say, of course, it's going to happen, right? And that's where we are with the automotive industry. And the same thing, if you look at the agriculture industry, you know, it's very, very data intensive. Mining is, you know, robotic intensive. The entire global supply chain, which adapted to the pandemic pretty resiliently, right? And then you look at Apple's ability to still come up with their new product with people not traveling from, you know, Cupertino to Taiwan or into China, and to be able to do that remotely and still maintain their product development life cycle. So there's a lot that can happen to create the next order of productivity improvement that is going to be quite interesting to and fascinating to watch over the next few years.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. I mean, there's no good time for a pandemic, but I guess if it had to happen, I think we were all pretty prepared for it. I mean, yes and no.
But so, you know, Lisa, let me just make one point. If we had the pandemic in 2008,
right,
the education would never have happened. None of these things could have been happened because we didn't have the technology and we didn't have the bandwidth, right, to be able to do that.
Yeah, we agree. We agree. So what are some of the other sectors that you think are not failing miserably? Okay, too soon to tell on that front, but what are the sectors that really need to catch up?
Well, I think healthcare needs to catch up, right? Because it's number one, very efficient and very, very ineffective in terms of how we think about having only face-to-face. Just like education was only face-to-face because we valued that high touch. And similarly, healthcare, there's a lot of value in that high touch. But what we have seen with this transformation is that there's a lot that could be done before, so that when there is that 1 hour or 45-minute interaction with the physician or the expert, the value is much greater than going in and coming out and then doing a second test or a third test or bring a third level of consultation. All that can be much more streamlined. And I would expect to see more of that happening with the technology. You know, so, and then agriculture is another sector in which we're going to see a lot more productivity. Supply chain, we're going to see a lot more productivity. Mining is going to be an area we're going to see a lot more productivity. Housing construction is going to see a lot more productivity with prefabricated and pre-modularized things that can be brought to bear. So I'm very bullish over the next 10 years that we will see technology having an impact. Energy and the energy grid is also going to be an interesting sector to watch.
Yeah, especially. I think that's really great. Now, it seems like media, entertainment, and telco have had a little bit of a leg up over the past 10 years and have been thinking about 5G and, you know, how to utilize it and all the use cases around that. So they also seem to be on the forefront. but also asset light.
Yeah,
for the most part.
Asset light. Yeah, I mean, it's mostly asset light because the device that we carry is relatively small, very powerful, and that allows us to access a lot more of the services. There would be no Uber if we didn't have a good 4G network, right? If we didn't know where the car was, we wouldn't feel comfortable with that. So Uber could not have happened without 4G, right? And now we are on to 5G, and we can talk about metaverse and every other thing that could come through the pipeline. But the telecom sector provided the catalyst for many of the digital transformation. Without a smartphone, Android and Apple, the last 10 years would not have happened. There'll be no Netflix for all practical purposes in the way we consume YouTube, Facebook, and all of that required that particular device. One device allowed the first level of digital transformation to happen. Now we are at the cusp of multiple technology converging: AI, AR, VR, robotics, 3D printing, cloud connectivity, cloud computing, machine learning. All of that were exactly in the same primitive stage as what 3G and smartphones were in 10 years. Now, when you combine all of that together, this is going to be interesting to see what more can happen in the next 5 to 10 years. But as I said earlier, it is a leadership issue. It is not a technology issue.
Right.
And often we look at technology as a way to solve the problem.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. We've talked about transformers and the accelerators, as you call it, right? What are the things that are holding companies back?
Yeah. So when I wrote the book and then been working with different companies, I identify what is called the transformation traps. The first one is the success trap. When companies are successful, they don't want to make changes because they believe that what made them successful is going to make them successful in the future. The second one is the leadership trap, where the leaders continue to believe that technology is at the periphery rather than at the core. The third one is the ecosystem trap, which means the partners that you're working with are not as digitally savvy, and you're very uncomfortable working with some of the digitally savvy partners. The fourth one is your talent trap, where the people that you have inside the company are not as digitally savvy, and they want to operate the same way. And so when you put these traps together, you begin to see companies hold back and say, the future is an extrapolation of the past rather than a reinvention of how things are going to be in the future. So the difference between the transformers and the accelerators are the accelerators have recognized that digital is a tailwind and not a headwind. Whereas the companies that are still slow to transform recognize the digital as a headwind. So they do just enough things to minimize the downside risk, whereas the accelerators look at digital as a tailwind and recognize that the future is going to be very different. And they're well on their path, knowing that they can't benchmark their speed relative to their past. They have to benchmark the speed relative to the best in the industry. And the best in the industry in terms of speed often are the small companies or the big digital giants that come in.
So yeah, we actually had a comment from the audience around more employing of CDOs and how CDOs are becoming so much more important within the organization today, and how they sit alongside the CIO and CTO. And also CISOs, obviously, with security being such a huge focus these days. Any thoughts on how that organizational structure may change over time?
Yeah,
with regard to transformation?
very good question and an important observation as we look at how companies are dealing with technology. If CDOs are designed as a symbolic response and not substantive response, they'll fail, because all you're doing is you say, oh, I've appointed a digital officer, or I've appointed a data officer, or I've appointed a technology officer, I've appointed an information officer. To me, it's not the structure that I'm interested. It is the decision rights given to them. If the digital officers have the responsibility to challenge the current business models, then you're really giving them the responsibility to say, you bring your expertise and show us how we can do a better job with our company, right? So if I'm a chief digital officer of General Motors, and I'm working with the CTO and the product designers to design a car that is going to be at the same level as some of the best designs that are coming out, the digital officer is part of the transformation, rather than if the chief digital officer is simply asked to make systems of record and systems of engagement work better with just the data tools, right? So it's the classic example, you know, when the current chairman of Volkswagen pulled together the team, he had all these different teams from the different functions, but I think they called the workshop something like Vision T. And Vision T stands for Vision Tesla, that said, how do we work together to create a car that is better than what Tesla would be by the time we launch this car? Not what Tesla is today, right? So that truly allows everyone to challenge the status quo. And what I meant earlier with this leadership trap and success trap is that if you bring a digital officer and a data officer and a technology officer, and if all they're doing is implementing your current strategy, you're giving them a different decision rights, and they don't have a voice. They may have a seat at the table, but they don't have a voice. So what I really would like to see is whether they go beyond asking whether they have a seat at the table to really ask whether they have a voice in shaping what the strategy is. And for too long, CIOs have clamored for seat at the table. But I've seen too many cases where they have a seat at the table, but they don't have a voice.
Yeah.
And that's the big problem that I see in this symbolic announcement of new roles and new people. And you can take a look at hundreds of announcements from companies. They're just excited to bring somebody on. They say, oh, we brought somebody in from a fast digital sector to bring. But what have they done 6 months later? Very little, right?
Yeah. Well, maybe your new book title will be called The Digital Trap.
Yeah, or, you know, leadership traps, right?
Leadership traps, right.
Right, it's the leadership, because that, you know, that's, to me, is the big issue, the traps.
It really is. It really is, truly. So share with our audience, because gosh, this 30 minutes goes so fast and I could talk to you for hours. Share with our audience, what is that one nugget that you would like to impart? That one thing, I'm sure there are a lot of them, but that one really important aha moment or advice. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's difficult to come up with one thing, but I like to say that successful companies fail because they overinvest in what they are good at today and underinvest in what they need to be good at tomorrow. It is easy to overinvest in what you've been good at. And what do I mean by investment? There's investment in people, investment in technology, investment in financial capital, and investment in time. So my only advice is for companies to take a look at how they are spending their time. Are they reinforcing what they've been good at relative to what they need to be good at tomorrow? Right?
Yes, that's great. And Venkat, thank you, good professor, for sharing and investing your time with us today. We truly appreciate it. This has been a wonderful conversation. And to all of our viewers, tune in for next week's CIONET Spotlight. Thank you so much, and everybody have a safe and wonderful day.